on our property, there were old abandoned pieces of a shed and car long left unused. I used to ask him all the time who those people were that left all this junk.
ガラクタだ
I'm
ね。
sure he got so tired of hearing it that he made up some elaborate stories how a brown bear ate them and haunted the woods afterwards. What's funny is I think it made those people seem more real. Growing up thinking they were still hanging out like they couldn't say goodbye. I used to tell my friends how I could swear I saw spirits move near the water, and that always freaked them out. I guess it didn't bother me, because the way I saw it, they were normal people with old cars and sheds, just trying to figure out how to survive and be happy in the middle of nowhere. It was a cool thought that they didn't want to leave, but you know, I was a weird kid.
Well, you had good company since those ghosts like living in a place where they were brutally devoured.
いや、この上どうやって行くんだろう。あ、こっちから登れるのかな。お、登れそうだぞ。登れそうだけどギリギリだな。オッケー、いけた。この上はなんかあるね、やっぱ。危ねえ。これが2個目だね。よいしょ。どうやんだ？こうかな？あれ？ボタン何押せばいいんだこれ。あれ？お、できたできた。ちょっとよくわかんないんだよな。じゃあまずはあっちが行くか。見えてるところからね。この感じだと最初に引き返したところももしかしたらなんかあったのかもしんないね。
Almost all stories follow the same kind of structure, and it starts with an inciting event, and then there's rising action, and then there's a climax, and then there's falling action. And it's actually really difficult to make an interesting story where you only hear these two people talking, and it's spoken through a dream that's already happened. And the most of the action is about this animal that isn't directly related to this couple at all. So I don't know what I was thinking, but my hope was that it would create some interesting things and connections that I didn't see before. And that was kind of the whole exercise of making the first tree.
もう後半に近づいてきたってことなんですかね。ここはさっき通過したとこかな。ミュージック。これも撮ったもんね。
I don't think the first tree could work at all without the music by Josh Kramer. And his music is actually publicly available.
あっちにはまだ行けないからやっぱ戻る感じなんだな。
And it's something I like to tell new indie developers all the time, like, you can't afford that composer, you can't afford a full-time programmer. You need to cut corners and finish your game. And the way to do that is to use these amazing publicly available assets that anyone can purchase and license. And so his music it's incredible, and I actually haven't talked to him that much. I've just emailed him. But his music was nominated for Most Emotional Music at the Emotional Game Awards in France, and he's just a really nice guy. And I think there's so much amazing content out there that if you're thinking of making a game, like, look around and see what you can make work on a tight budget, because it worked really well for the first tree.
ラスト1個どこですかね。 これもさっき撮った気がするな。一応もう一回。
Earlier I said I just love going through video games and exploring, like looking at every nook and cranny and just trying to find little details. And I think that started because in middle school and high school, I would make mods for my favorite games, namely Jedi Knight, Jedi Outcast, and Far Cry. And I loved like this huge world of mod makers who would make these levels and it'd be like the most random creative things. And I would just love exploring, usually multiplayer levels by myself. So even though I went to college for film, before that, like before high school, I was making video games and mods, and it was my favorite thing in the world. I made a ton of different levels. I made an abandoned space hotel with a dance floor and cafeteria. I made a haunted campground with cabins and tents. I made this whole city with like the first ever day-night cycle with running showers and stuff in the hotel and the apartment buildings. And I just loved making those mods, and I think that carries over to my game, the first tree, and also the one before that, Home is Where One Starts, which is it's exploration. You're just looking around and appreciating the details.
めっちゃカフェテリアに聞き覚えがあったわ。お、ここ掘れ、コンコン。
We were happiest underneath the evergreens. We decided it was time to finally map out the hundreds of acres we lived on.Just to pass the time during the summer. He was only free in the evenings, so I would spend the day wasting time on dial-up internet and sketching, and then we would rush into the woods, pen and map in hand, before evening fell. Sometimes, the aurora borealis would cast a cold green glow on the mountainside, and we would finish our route underneath a twilight sky. Sometimes I was lonely during those summer days,but there was comfort in the routine.
A lot of teenagers aren't looking for the daily grind, though. There's nothing wrong with wanting to get out, to leave your childhood home. You wanted to progress, to make something of yourself.
Yeah, you're right. That house. I'm sure it's the same as how I left it. Then why does it feel so different?
I doubt you're the only adult to have looked back and asked that question.
すごいなんかジョセフの成長を感じますね。やっぱ大人になるとはこういうことなんだな。ここ飛べるか？ここ。いや、無理だね。別のところから行けないとダメなんだな、きっと。どうしよう。どっちから行こう。ここ登れるかな。登れそうで登れないね。やっぱりじゃあこっちから上に行かないといけないのかな。あ、こっちの方が行けそう。なんか盛り上がってる。でどこ行きゃいいの？下ではないよな。わかんないな。お、あるじゃん。これだ。いまいちどうやるかわからない。なんかオッケーオッケー、できた。なんかガラガラいってる。多分それでさっき木っていうかツルみたいなのが塞がってたところが通れるようになったんじゃないかな。問題はどうやっていくか覚えてないところ。お、こっから抜けられそうだね。 こっちで合ってるかな。こっちだな。まあ家族とはね、仲良くしましょうってことですね。もういなくなってからじゃやっぱり親孝行もできませんからね、子供視点だと。すごいなんか自分も反抗期がねすごい長かったんでそれはねやっぱなんだろうな、親孝行しなきゃなって思う時たまにありますね。子供の頃はねもう塾行くのが大嫌いで、すごいサボったりしてたらね親父に見つかって殴られたりしてたんですけど、やっぱねなんだろう、今になってその大事さというか、よくしてくれてたんだなっていうのがやっぱね年いってから感じるんだよね。その時にこうありがたみやっぱ感じてなかったから。この前ちょっと前にね自分もちょっと資格試験の勉強とかしてたんですけど、それもねやっぱり勉強してて思ったのが、その習慣的にやってなかったんでやっぱやり始めるのが大変だったんだよな。その点まあ塾とかに行かしてもらってたから、まあ勉強始めるのはそんなに苦じゃないというか、なんだろうね、大人になってから勉強って楽しいんだなって思ったね。死んだ親父はもう戻ってくるはないんだよ。あー、キツネがー。そんな。なんか敵っぽいのがいるけど、敵じゃないんだろうな、あれきっと。狼じゃん。狼じゃん。これ狼を許すなってことどこ行った。あ、待って待って待って待って。すげえ。光ってたよ、今。いや、これ気づかないでしょ。ちょっとあまりにも視点操作が良くないね。狼に食べられちゃったのかな。まあ強いものにはねやられてしまうのは仕方ないけど、やっぱ家族を失ってからね気づくこともあるっていうことですね。子供視点だと、まあ、家族を大事にしましょうと。で、大人のね親の視点だと、まあ言葉足らずなね親心っていうものがあると思うんですけど、やっぱそこもねちゃんと説明してあげてほしいね。子供なんか完全に分かってるかどうか分かんないけど、その家庭環境にもよるから。けどやっぱり大事なことはね言葉で伝えてあげるのがベストじゃないかなって思います。そうすればね今後の成長にも変化がありますからね。多分俺はね褒められて伸びるタイプだったから、もっと褒めてもらった方がよかったね。けなされてばっかだったんで、ああもういいやっ って思っちゃうタイプだったからな。まあ親が良かれと思ってやってることも子供にとっては迷惑だったりするんだけどね、その時は。さあ、向こうに白いのが見えますね。あれを取りに行きたい。壮大な音楽を。ここほれコンコン。もう寝なきゃな。このことを話すのはもう辛いんだ。おやすみ。おー、ジョセフ。まあ辛いよな。こっち進めばいいのかな。おお、進んだ。なになになになになに、今度は何これ、夢の中みたいな。なんかいろいろ光ってるけど。ジョセフ、こんな気持ちで寝てはいけないわ。
I'm sorry for everything, and I know you need space, but I'm here for you. You don't need to feel so lost. Joseph, have I ever told you what my mother was like?
Hello, my name is Elise Whaley, and I was the voice actress for Rachel. I'm also David's wife.
めっちゃレイチェルが語り出した。
So that was convenient for working together. I was actually the voice actress for his first game, Home is Where One Starts, and I guess that I did a good enough job that David wanted me back, so I did the voice acting for this one as well. David definitely coached me through it because I'm pretty inexperienced when it comes to that. Home is Where One Starts was my first time ever doing voice acting of any kind. And we watched a lot of trailers of movies we liked to get the voice right of female leads who were talking in the trailer and try to mimic that and bring that into the game. So that had the right kind of feel and the right kind of atmosphere for the voice. My character actually is the same character from Home is Where One Starts. If you've played that game, you probably connected that together. And this is her probably about 15 years later, maybe 20 years later, in this game. I was happy to revisit the character of Rachel. We kind of leave her in an ambiguous spot in Home is Where One Starts. It definitely ends on a hopeful note, but there's not a lot of details. And in this game, you see that she's able to move on through a lot of her issues that she had from her abusive home and be able to start her own family and start a new cycle without that abuse, which I think is really inspiring.
You know what it's like not to have a mom at home. And you know how hard that made my childhood. What helped me was watching the birds in the morning before the school bus came. I thought that my mother was one of those birds, and it made me want to be free like her. My mom taught me how to fold origami cranes while she was in the hospital. So I told myself I would fold one every day until I could fly myself. I think we both have always loved animals, and for me that love started with a dog. Sometimes this Rottweiler would come up to our property line and wait at the fence for me, but only once in a while. I was sure to check every day immediately after school, and it usually ended in disappointment. I would even steal money from my passed-out dad just so I could buy these off-brand dog biscuits. Even when she did stop by, she never went beyond the fence. Why was she so scared?
So it's always interesting working with your spouse because, especially on a creative project, because they want your feedback, but it's something that's also dear to their heart, and they're dear to your heart, and you definitely don't want to hurt their feelings. So
レイチェルが過ごしてた環境も結構すごそうですね。
and he asked me to go over it and see what I thought. And I had minored in English. I majored in art, but I minored in English, so I felt like I had a little bit of experience. But I was definitely like a little scared because you don't want to be too harsh, but you also want to be honest. And it was the biggest relief when I read the script. And I was like, oh, good. My husband's a good writer. I don't have to change that much about this, just a few like grammatical things. And that was just like the biggest relief for me because it can be a tricky balance working with your spouse and making sure that honesty is there,
めっちゃ
but also
めっちゃ
that
鹿いる。
love and the support is
鹿
there as well.
キツネじゃねえよな。
I think my dad was the opposite of your dad in almost every way. Except he was in the military as well.
あらかわい
Coped
い。
with alcohol of every kind. The trailer started falling apart, he got angry, and I withdrew. More and more I became the weird, quiet kid who made lots of origami birds and carried talk biscuits around. I think we were pretty similar when it came to being the weird kids. And that same sincerity in college was one of the reasons I was so drawn to you. Life got worse and worse. And at one point, I really didn't think I could survive another day with my soul still intact. I had no real friends, let alone neighbors, since we lived in the middle of nowhere. I should have talked to my teacher, but I was scared what he would do if he found out. As I waited for the school bus one morning, I walked around until I found something in an abandoned shed. Something I can't put into words.
So we're talking about homes where one starts a lot. So if you haven't played that game, maybe this doesn't make as much sense, or maybe this is a little
やっぱ
plug that
ギ
you
リ
should
ギ
go
リ
play
で
it.
生きてきたみたいな感じだね。
In that game, it actually features one of my artworks. I work as an artist and paper cutting actually, and David used one of my artworks as a graffitied stencil in Home is Where One Starts that's against the wall of this shack. And it actually shows up again in the first tree, just a fragment of it. The first tree, the title actually comes from one of my artworks that I made back in 2015, I want to say. And I made this artwork while I was pregnant with our first child. And it had a lot of meaning for me, and David actually helped me come up with the title. And he asked because I was really struggling. I was like, I have no idea what to call this, and I always go to David for title ideas and to bounce ideas off of him, and that's like the only way I can ever come up with a title is by talking with him. So we were talking back and forth and looking at this artwork, and he said, well, what kind of like movies or shows were you watching while you're making the artwork? Because my work's pretty tedious, so sometimes I'll watch a show or do some Netflix binging while I'm creating it. And I was like, oh, I actually watched Tree of Life a ton. And then we're like, Tree of Life, and we started thinking more about that, and then arrived at the first tree. So it started off as one of my artworks and then became a part of David's art, which I think is really cool that we were able to share that title.
I summoned courage I didn't know I had, and I broke into my dad's room and found the key to the shed where he had locked my bike. I'll never forget that feeling of the wind rushing by my ears as the sun rose over fields of wheat. I was flying for the first time. I biked as far as my legs could take me until I found a house that felt friendly, and that felt like home. Those strangers helped me in so many ways, and if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have found my foster family.
Fox knew her last cub would be waiting for her at the first tree. She was almost there. The rain cascaded onto the Jade Valley where the entrance to the tree was. Life was protected there, because that's where life began. It was now only a mother and a daughter left. Items from my life still dotted the ground as she moved closer to her destination and destiny.
すごいなんかジョセフの話がめっちゃ重いめっちゃ重い。 じゃあちょっと途中ですけど、今回はこの辺にしとこうかな。